Reminder of this huge mistake and how there's nothing I can do to make it better.
I feel like Chuck E. Cheese has to be a staple memory in at least the majority of our childhoods. I know for sure he was in mine, going there for almost every birthday party, and from the stories I hear, I was probably more of a menace to Sir Chuck than he ever could have been to me. Needless to say, I loved that bastard, but I'd be lying if I said looking into his soulless animatronic eyes didn't give me the creeps. The popular horror phenomenon Five Nights at Freddy's created a surge of animatronic horror, bringing us multiple games, some weird films, and a ton of other creations utilizing the fear of animatronics. Now, during my first handful of analog videos, I covered the first 3 parts of the Walten Files, which at first glance appears to be the distant cousin to Five Nights at Freddy's, but very soon managed to walk its own path down the story it was telling. And boy was I excited to get the notification that the 4th part had been released. For those who are unaware, the Walten Files follows the similar beats, with people getting force-shoved into animatronic suits. Except this time our characters are from the incredibly popular Bond's Burgers. I highly recommend checking out the original series before getting into this analysis to support the original creator and to get caught up, since I'll try to fill you in as we go, but we're mostly going to be covering the new release. But without further ado, the previous Walten Files entry certainly left me feeling unnerved, and I have no doubt that this one is going to just add on to that. But before I let you get too far, just wanted to say if you're new here and enjoy what you're watching, be sure to hit all those neat buttons down below, including the subscribe and bell notification so you can be a part of every new upload. Also, real quick, just wanted to mention that as of this moment, me and some others are going to be at Phoenix Fan Fusion all 3 days, May 24th through the 26th. Not affiliated with the event in any ways, just going to have a fun time, so if any of you already have tickets or are planning on it, you might see some familiar faces. There will more than likely be more info and details as the convention gets closer, but anyways, now you can pass through. The Walten Files 4, Cyberfun Tech. The first thing we are met with in this new entry is a handful of balloons floating down off the frame, before we quickly cut inside what looks to be a school of some sorts. We end up getting a glimpse of this sign at the top letting us know this is the Spring Event Festival. Unfortunately, in the last part, we learned that at said Spring Event Festival is when Felix Kranken, the co-founder of Bunny Smiles, got into a drunk driving accident resulting in the loss of Jack Walton's 2 kids, Ed and Molly. In the last entry, it appears that after the accident, the souls of Ed and Molly both went and took over the little stuffed gray bunny, Rocket, that Molly carried around with her. As the scene carries out, it really looks like we are going to get a front row animated seat to this incident, to which I am not really looking forward to. As Ed and Molly walk through the hall, they stumble upon Felix, doing what he does best. The two walk over to him as the scene fades to white, and then brings us to this very dreamlike farm area. Right off the bat, it is really amazing how much the quality of the series has jumped since the last part. Don't get me wrong, the whole series has been impressive given the art style and all the arcade animation, but this right here just took it to a whole new level. After all that, we are then met with what appears to be an advert for Cyberfun Tech, which comes off as nice and cute at first, but quickly turns the other direction. If I had to guess, we are getting all this footage from some company training DVD, given the video menu we are presented with. The first option is a Bond's Burgers promo, to which we get this letter written by Charles Brooke. The letter seems to talk about how Charles had just got hired as a computer supervisor for an unnamed Bunny Smiles restaurant. Sounds like he is close to our Susan Woodings, who we learned got pretty messed up and now resides in Banny. And overall, Charles just seems to be a big fan of this company. We then get presented with a performance from the Showstoppers. Just look at them go. As the performance plays on, we periodically focus on one of the characters. Our first is Boozoo, to which we transition to this other image of him standing by the flowers. We then go over to Banny, and the same thing occurs. We cut to the children having fun before fading on a cartoon Banny running along the fields. I may be overthinking, but I have a feeling this is supposed to represent them missing their original lives when they weren't just souls stuck to metal. Next up is Shaw, who appears to reminisce on the same sense of freedom, but then we quickly get a flash to her standing in front of this door. My guess is this is calling back to how Rosemary Walton ended up inside Shaw. If memory serves me right, Bond lured her into the back room, saying her husband would be on the other side, and, well, I guess he technically was. Last but not least, we got the big man himself, Bond. We start to flash back to something in the woods before we get a very quick frame of who I can only guess is Jack Walten. After that, we get met with a very unnerving frame of who I can only imagine to be Jack in the dark. Or perhaps Rosemary, since the eyes look a little bit ladylike. But that's enough holding on to this awful frame. Next up, we get a neat look at the first exo design for the animatronics. We even get a little Mr. DNA-like friend to help us through the history of the animatronics creation. First on the list is concept art. What's cool is I imagine it is all real concept art for the Walten Files, but it works in the story as being art for the restaurant. We then get introduced to the artist behind the work. Turns out it's Rosemary Walten. When the narrator goes to say she is the wife of Jack Walten, his name doesn't get said, but it does appear in the closed captioning. Ironic that her photo gets put over the drawing of Shaw. We even get to hear a snippet of an audio interview with her as she explains her process.
I think I always had a pretty clear idea of how each character looked like in my mind. The designs just made sense to me.
After all that, we get to hear from Susan Woodings herself, as she explains the business relationship between Cyberfun Tech and Bunny Smiles Inc.
Bunny Smiles originally reached Cyberfun to make their blueprints for the animatronics, but we all got so invested in the idea that we decided to have a full partnership with BSI.
Apparently, BSI only hired Cyberfun for the animatronic blueprints, but after getting incredibly invested, both companies decided to commit to a full partnership for the creation. Susan Woodings turned out to be the lead technical engineer of BSI, so if anyone is going to know the ins and outs of these animatronics, it's gonna be her, even though she really learned what the ins and outs are later on. We then get showed some various images of some events that Bond's Burgers held, it seems, and these kids don't seem to be very thrilled about what they're looking at. Susan then turns the camera on to show us some more behind the scenes of the animatronics. However, what happens next leaves a lot for us to figure out. Now clearly this letter is unreadable at first glance, but there is nothing Photoshop can't help us with. Mr. Kranken, this is Norman. I'm sending you this letter on behalf of our deal between Bunny Smiles and Cyberfun Tech, and most importantly, the well-being of our Cyberfun staff. We've been getting a lot of complaints about a number of our staff going missing who was highly associated with you and your team. Susan Woodings has been missing for a week now, and here at Cyberfun Tech, we are working as hard as we can to try and manage to get in contact with her. Is there perhaps any detail you could hand us to help locate our missing employee? I'm going to be entirely honest with you, Mr. Kranken, and tell you that I have a ton of questions and suspicions about whatever is going on with your company. Whatever it is, it's making both your company and mine look bad in public light, so, again, if there's anything that could help us find Susan, write back immediately. So it sounds like after Felix Kranken got into the accident that killed Jack's kids, Jack went missing and presumably at some point died, and his spirit took over the Bond suit. That suit then went and stuffed Rosemary into Shaw and Susan into Banny, all while Felix was running the business behind the scenes post-Jack. And now we have someone from Cybertech showing major concern over the fact that their employees are going missing. Susan goes on to explain more about the animatronics features, like its face recognition and motion, and even some notes on the blueprint designs. The next segment we are met with appears to be Susan and Charles Brooks doing some animatronic tests from within this console. According to Susan, they are running a multitude of tests, and the first one is a movement test, to see if the animatronic can get to them without running into the tables and chairs. First up is Banny, who manages to get a killer head start until they collapse over the table. Next test is facial tracking, except this time we interrupt a conversation between Susan and Charles talking about Felix and Jack.
I don't know who he is either.
I know. I'm just a little worried.
Knowing Felix, he's probably drinking somewhere in town.
Does Jack or Rose know?
Nope, I don't think Linda told him about it either.
Susan, we have to tell them. Heck, even Chris knows about the addiction.
From what I can piece together, these tests are taking place before Linda, Felix's lover, leaves him because of his alcoholism, and before Felix gets into his accident. We get back into the test, and it's time for Shaw to see if she can recognize some faces. According to Charles, it was already able to recognize Ed and Molly just fine, but Susan states that it ended up having trouble recognizing Sophie's face. For those who don't remember Sophie, or Sophie Walten, she was Jack's third kid who luckily didn't get into any car with drunk Felix. But for some reason, the Shaw animatronic had a hard time with her face. Shaw approaches and scans their faces. We even get a fun animatic for it. Shaw successfully recognizes both Susan and Charles, to which tests can end for the day. Our next test footage takes place after the accident. We can tell based on the conversation we are interrupting.
What does that mean?
That's what I heard, man.
He was drunk while driving the car?
Oh, your voice, all right?
According to both Susan and Charles, they both don't believe the story that Felix has told. Is there something more to the incident outside of the drunk driving? Things are clearly tense in the room, but Susan and Charles just go on to check out the games. Except someone else seems to be there with them. The rocket plushie approaches one of the animatronics, and it is able to begin its facial recognition to show two faces. The scene we get next, I believe, confirms that Jack Walton is now residing inside Bon. Our next segment has us following Susan again, except this time we are back in the animated world. She wanders the area with her light before approaching the Bon animatronic. We see the rocket plushie is also in the room. Susan continues walking around and investigating as it sounds like someone else is with her. Unfortunately for Susan, we get our front row seat of Bon making his attack. It looks as if Susan isn't killed immediately by the neck snap, but rather just paralyzed from the neck down. We watch in horror as the Bon animatronic, now possessed by Jack supposedly, drags her body away. After all that, we go back to May 3rd, 1974, the day after Felix's accident. We follow Jack as it looks as if he is driving over to Felix's house, desperate to know where his kids are. No one appears to be answering the door, and Jack is getting more and more frustrated, completely taken over by the fact that his children could be dead. It doesn't sound like Felix is home, though we can hear all the messages Jack had sent to his voicemail playing in the background.
If this is some prank you're trying to pull, I don't find it funny, so please, don't make me drive over to Felix.
We cut to see Felix sitting in an open grave, facing the plushie. From the looks of things, after the crash, he buried Ed and Molly, and left an open one for himself. He eventually crawls out of the grave and looks over at one of their bloody backpacks. Felix takes Rocket and the backpack and starts to walk over to a cliff. He approaches the edge and tosses the backpack into the water, and then he throws one of their shoes. Felix gets incredibly close to then throwing himself off, but is unable to follow through. The following segment dates us at May 5th, a few days post-accident. According to Felix, he had just gotten back from confessing the truth to Jack and Rose. Felix goes on to basically talk to himself, but according to him, the doll is following him around. Whether or not this is true or just him driving himself mad is unclear, but we can see this haunting image of Ed and Molly appearing through the window behind Rocket. From this next scene, it actually does look like the doll is starting to haunt Felix, and rightfully so, I must say.
I'm so sorry, please. God, I'm so sorry.
July 1st, 1974, the day after Susan was killed. We watch as Bon horrifically mangles Susan's body into the Banny animatronic, with Rocket as another witness. However, not long after, it looks as if we enter this afterlife-esque realm, where it appears that Ed and Molly are able to communicate with each other. From the sound of things, this is in fact some sort of afterlife where their souls are sent to, as according to Molly, they need to go find Susan and help her. And I gotta be honest, this is one of the most frightening designs I have ever seen. And it's not even a monster, it's just poor Susan who got horribly strangled. Susan's soul is clearly very confused, but she hears another voice from the distance, who claims to be a friendly force, introducing her to this world known as Wonderland. According to this voice, she isn't dead, but her soul and body have been separated. We get to know the identity of this mysterious voice, and it turns out it's Bon, who also doesn't have a very friendly design. Bon claims he is going to try and fix Susan. He offers her a gift. When she opens it, she sees a mask of Banny. Bon tells her that this is the new her, a gift that will eventually become her new body. When Susan asks what happens if she refuses, Bon tells her that a soul can't exist without some sort of vessel, so it wouldn't be very smart to not accept the body. Bon reaches out his bloody animatronic hands and goes to put the mask on her head. We then see as Susan wakes up inside the Banny animatronic, with someone else walking around the back room. Ed and Molly are unfortunately too late in reaching Susan in time, and they both walk off together into the bright light before this entry comes to a close. I was ready to wrap things up here, but apparently at second glance there's an unlisted entry following the 4th chapter. Lacrimosa. According to the description of this entry, it said that after Felix had walked away from the cliff, he went over to the police station to confess. Well, confess is a funny way of putting it, considering he told them the crash knocked him out, and when he came to, the kids had run off. Sure, he ends up telling the truth a couple days later, but come on, asshole. The entry begins and we are listening in on the police radio, and it looks as if we have found Ed and Molly's bodies. We quickly cut over to what looks to be another informational tape about the CT console, the head control of the animatronics. We are once again reminded about the map tracking feature and told that if anything appears to be malfunctioning, to contact Charles Brooks. Except we have a little audio cut out when we attempt to say his name.
Please contact Charles Brooks.
We take a brief pause, but the video ends up continuing, except in the background it sounds like knocks are periodically getting faster and faster. We even get a horrific image of Sir Charles in the darkness. We then go on to talk about the facial recognition feature again. Still, that knocking is getting faster. The narrator reminds us that the system isn't perfect and can still mistake faces for others, but we very quickly cut away from that fact. What we cut to looks to be another scene of Susan getting her Banny treatment, with Bond mushing her around to get her fit. All the while, we can hear Charles over the phone in the background heavily concerned over Susan's disappearance. As Bond continues to stuff her inside the suit, we see we have another spectator in the background. It kinda looks like Charles, but if I'm correct, he is currently still alive. We are taken to a top-down view of what appears to be Wonderland, with Susan stuck in the middle before we move over to another facial recognition sequence. The face we track transitions us into Susan, seemingly gaining control of the Banny suit. Due to the odd difference in design, I am assuming this isn't the real world, and we are still in some alternate plane. Susan proceeds to walk around what looks to be a Bond's Burgers restaurant, but completely emptied out. Susan approaches a lone television that looks to be showing security footage of the restaurant, potentially the real world. She turns over and we see Bond has been peeking around the corner watching us. We move over to where he was located and it looks like we can see an exit. The dark void opens up and reveals Wonderland, but before we can make any steps towards it, a giant obstacle decided he wanted to be in the way. I am almost at a loss for words as to how impressive this whole series has been, especially this last entry. We got full-on animated segments to tell our story, and it was absolutely haunting. The design of these characters are incredibly well done and super unsettling. They almost look like human Muppets. But watching them move around like they do just added a whole new level of fear. It really seemed like this 4th part took all the little tidbits of info and events we only heard about in the previous parts and actually showed them to us. We got to see the unfortunate event of Ed and Molly play out, and we even got Susan's demise just fully shown to us. I love the idea that there is this wonderland of some sorts, where these souls go and reside unless they are thrown into another vessel. It's not clear if these spirits can just take themselves to Wonderland anytime, or if it's just a one-time thing. But it definitely looked like Ed and Molly were able to jump to Wonderland and rock it at ease. Yet it also seemed like they were trying to prevent Bond from making the Banny suit Susan's new vessel. All very confusing, yet super intriguing. I still can't say I am 100% sure that Jack is possessing the Bond animatronic, but the signs all seem to point to that being the case. The only thing that makes me believe otherwise is why would Jack be doing all this harm? It wouldn't really make sense if it was for justice for his children, since his kids are technically already with him. And what purpose would he have to murder Susan and Charles and Rosemary and anybody who got taken out? Another mystery is the lack of Sophie in this entry. She seemed to play a major part of the story, being now the only surviving Walten, and who is consistently getting pumped with forget-me pills. I truly don't know where the series could possibly take us next, but given the level of quality this one had, I am beyond excited to see what they were able to pull off in the second part. It really feels like analog horror has reached a new high, where all these pieces we see come out are just getting better and better, and the production has continually been getting out of this world. We are on the verge of a new age of internet horror. I can sense it because we have been getting gifted with fantastic works of art. But all that being scared has certainly made me pretty hungry. I'm thinking Chuck E. Cheese's cardboard pizza will hit just the spot.